I think the security needs to be re-evaluated because it's not hard to get anything through if you're trying to.
They'll get us through fast, and it seems like they're kind of rushing, but then other times it seems like they're just chatting to each other and kind of oblivious to what's happening.
Since 9/11, Americans have been told there is nothing more important than the government ensuring their safety on the ground and, most important, in the air. A job that falls to the men and women of the Transportation Security Administration. While some may value their position, even treat it and your safety with the respect it deserves, it has become obvious, again, that is far from the case. And in light of a recent investigation, there is absolutely no reason for any passenger to feel safe at any time on board a commercial flight. So let's get to work. First up, the senior policy analyst for the Independent Women's Forum, Hadley Heath Manning, and the adjunct journalism professor at Marymount Manhattan College and Seton Hall University, Dorian Davis. Thanks so much for joining us. And Hadley Heath, I'm going to start with you on the TSA story today because this is scary. The Department of Homeland Security own office of the Inspector General got banned items through the screening process in 67 out of 70 tests it conducted across the nation. As I said, I'm going to say it again. Would you agree that there is no reason for anybody to feel safe when they go through a commercial airliner and airport at this time?
I would agree. And, this is one of those cases where we have to be thankful that there is an inspector general to perform tests like this. This is a 95% failure rate for the Department of Homeland Security and the TSA. It's funny that we spend so many resources trying to protect passengers. And then on the other hand, I feel like, my 5-ounce tube of toothpaste gets caught every time. So there seems to be an inconsistency in the way the rules are applied. And of course, despite our attempts to make people feel safe, we end up making regular passengers who are particularly safe passengers feel as if they've been accosted before they even get to their gate.
Dorian, here's the thing that has to be just vexing to people, and I indicated this a little bit in my lead in here. We have been told recently that the TSA was getting better. We're told that the government is making it better, checking to make sure that there is actual security here. This, as I said, I can't make it any clearer. This is a clown car waiting to happen right now because nobody's fixing the issues.
Yeah, Ed, I completely agree with Hadley on this. I think in government in general, there's this idea that if we throw money at something, it will automatically become better. And we've invested something like $500 million over the last few years in new technologies for the TSA. And I'm reading that their rate for bomb detection is lower than it was in 2007. Now, they are replacing the director, but it's with the deputy director. And so I think the question there is, are new ideas for new security measures coming into the picture, or is it going to be more of the same?
I like the fact that they're calling it deeply alarming. I would say that that's probably the greatest understatement of all when it comes to this story. Second story up is the FBI and mysterious surveillance flights. This is interesting too. Dorian, I'll stay with you. In a 30-day period, the FBI flew more than 30 cities in 11 states across the country. They had their aircraft, and apparently they're there, they're listening. But this is not anything new. These flights have been going on for a long time. Why should Americans fear this?
I don't think Americans should fear it, Ed. I'm not going to rush to judgment on this. Obviously, there is a value to conducting operations in secret. The government has to do that from time to time. I think the question on this one, though, is how much concrete evidence are we getting from programs like this? We just learned a week ago that we've learned nothing from Patriot Act snooping programs. So if this is a rerun of that same situation, then it would be cause for alarm, maybe about government waste.
So, Hadley Heath, we still have to maintain the security of the United States. Certainly, we have the Freedom/Patriot Act issue that's going on right now. The NSA says they cannot keep us any safer than they used to. All right, wait a minute. Let's take a breath. We still have to do certain things in order to keep the American people safe. So does this not fall under just that indeed? It's not as if, well, they still can listen to calls here from the air, but you've still got to do something, right?
Right, and my first reaction to this story was, is anyone really surprised that an intelligence gathering agency like the FBI is using a cover-up for some of their missions, using fake companies to hide from the public exactly what they're doing? Because there is an advantage to having some secrecy when you are an intelligence agency. On the other hand, there's been a recent change to the rules regarding unmanned aircrafts like drones. When they're flying overhead, they have to have a specific reason, an investigation or a certain activity that they're investigating. So why not apply those same rules to manned aircrafts? I think a lot of Americans are questioning whether or not it's necessary to have so much surveillance and whether or not that's an invasion of our privacy. So there's a balance here. Of course, we want to feel safe, but we also want to feel free, and we want to have, a right to some privacy in the kind of lives that we live.
Got to be careful. We're not getting much balance at all when it comes down to the government these days. All right, let's step overseas. Iraq. The Iraqi prime minister says the rise of ISIS is the failure of the world. He wants the world to share the blame for this. He believes, and here it is, I think this is a failure on the part of the world. There's a lot of talk of support for Iraq. There is very little on the ground. The problem is not exclusively in Iraq. We are trying to do our part, but Daesh was not created in Iraq. Hadley Heath, I'll tell you what, if you look at this from a news perspective, I got to agree with him. I think it is not just Iraq's fault. I think that there is a world blame, and the West has to take some blame for what's happening here.
Well, I think ISIS is the fault of ISIS. ISIS is doing evil things, and there's no victim blaming that, is.
So you don't think, though, that we created ISIS in any way? Those who say that the American government created them, you don't fall for that?
No, I don't fall for that. I think ISIS understands that they are terrorizing the world. Now, I think there is a valid argument that the Iraqi prime minister makes that we aren't doing enough to fight them as a global community. Of course, I think the United States is number one in leading airstrikes against ISIS. And of course, the UK has provided some air support as well. But globally, yes, we should expect from our allies as well that they contribute to the effort to contain and squelch ISIS. But I don't think we should blame the American culture or our government for creating this foe. This is an enemy that's just downright evil. All
right, well, certainly not the culture. I will give you that much as well. But Dorian, what do you think? He says the West is to blame here. And if you look, there's a lot of things that the West, and especially America under the Obama administration, has failed to do in order to put a lot of this insurrection down.
Well, look, the Prime Minister of Iraq obviously has a political incentive not to blame himself or his government for what's happening there. So Iraq does play a role in this. Obviously, It's their country and they have to get their house in order. But we created a vacuum when we left in 2011, I believe. We could have had a status of forces agreement. We could have kept a presence there. And we left a vacuum in which ISIS was able to flourish and Iran was able to step in as the hero. And we do bear some responsibility for that.
All right, I got about 90 seconds left. Last one, the Supreme Court has ruled that Abercrombie and Fitch did not accommodate a job applicant who wore a hijab that they said, the Supreme Court says, violated civil rights law. Here's what it all means legally from a legal expert.
So essentially what today's ruling does is put the onus on businesses and basically says you can't put your head in the sand. If you think someone needs a religious accommodation, you need to make every effort to make that accommodation happen.
Dorian, the Supreme Court found 8-1 against Abercrombie and Fitch in this case. Whatever happened to a retailer, to a business having a dress code?
Well, it's gone now, Ed. I think this decision makes a lot of legal sense, but maybe not so much common sense. Abercrombie is a brand that established itself on nudity. Its most buzzworthy product was this catalog that had, more skin than clothing. And this is definitely off-brand for them. But the Civil Rights Act is very clear, Ed, and that's why I don't think the decision was a surprise.
Hadley Heath, to you?
I agree 100%. I'm usually the kind of person who says live and let live, let employers have the type of employment policies that work for them. But once you have civil rights protections on the book, protected classes like religious minorities, then to enforce them fully, we have to ask, was this look policy from Abercrombie discriminatory towards a religious minority? And I think that there's a good case that Abercrombie perfectly understood that this young woman was wearing a headscarf because of her religion.
Well, also, the young lady said she was never informed of the look policy as well, so there's an awful lot to lead into this here. We'll talk about this many, many more months into the future. Hadley Heath Manning, Dorian Davis, I want to thank you both for joining us. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks for your time. Coming up next, the teacher who failed his entire class and actually had a good reason to do it. He joins us next, right here on MidPoint.